right. Okay, so our scripture today is the full chapter of chapter 8 in Ecclesiastes. I'm telling you, we're getting really close. So, if you will, and you want to, turn to your scriptures to Ecclesiastes chapter 8. I'll read this. I'm reading from the New International Version today. Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person in wisdom brightens their faith and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has the power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in a time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place, and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth: the righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat, drink, and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun, despite all their efforts to search it out. No one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they really cannot comprehend it. This is the word of God for the people of God. All right. Ecclesiastes chapter 8. I guess I'm going to mispronounce that the rest of the day, so hang in there. It is truly, as I was reading it this week, in between things, I thought this is really the most contemporary book or most immediately relevant chapter in all of biblical wisdom, I think. But I suspect by the end of it, we'll still find ourselves wrestling with the reality of what we cannot fully understand. Our culture today is walking through this intense upheaval in many ways. And one of the defining characteristics of our culture in this past decade has been a total loss of trust in what we would call the system or institutions, right? We have seen this loss of trust, and it's manifested itself in protest of all kinds of things, from police brutality to media bias to families being torn apart because of stances of medical vaccines, right? There's many things that people right now know this just isn't right. And they're expressing their frustrations in ways that Ecclesiastes would say might be a little bit unhelpful, maybe even arrogant or unwise. Now, we live inside these systems. That's government, workplaces, schools, healthcare, our economic structures, family structures. Some of these systems work. Sometimes they protect and they serve, but oftentimes it feels like they frustrate or overlook and sometimes crush the people. Now, the problem is I can't point to the book of Ecclesiastes and say, look, there's the answer, because Ecclesiastes doesn't like to do that. It doesn't offer simplistic advice for people who live under these imperfect authorities or systems. But it speaks honestly about powerful rulers or injustices that seem to go unpunished, that when the righteous people suffer, and for the future that we cannot control. Yet, Koheleth, the writer of Ecclesiastes, insists there is a Christian way or a faithful way to live in spite of it. He gave us a preview last week about avoiding extremes. And this week, he gives us some direct applications in particular situations of what it looks like to avoid extreme positions in a world where we don't have the power or the control or the knowledge to understand things. God has an eternal perspective. We have a limited, finite perspective. We cannot even imagine to fix things, right? So the question is, on that next slide, that first slide, how do we survive the system without being shaped by its fear or cynicism or corruption? And to answer the question, Koheleth returns to a familiar theme, and he speaks about the value of wisdom. So on that next slide, we get to read verse 1 there. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? Being wise makes one's face shine, but arrogance changes one's face. Now you can tell Koheleth has this love-hate relationship with wisdom. He knows that wisdom is better than folly, but he also knows that wisdom has its limits. Here in verse 1, he extols the person who is wise and cautions against arrogance. Speaking through the prophet Isaiah, you might remember this verse. God says, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." It's easy for us to get over our skis and think that we can know everything or we can correct all the wrongs that have ever happened. But if we think that and if we try to do that, we will begin to act in unfaithful ways and will mix up what it means to be virtuous and what it means to be foolish in this world. Now in verses 2 through 9, Koheleth speaks of the normal setting for someone in the time that he wrote in 1000 BC. It was life under a king. Now, we might feel today that we're just pawns in political power games or other people's pursuit of power. At least I feel that way a lot of time. But it was even worse for people back in that day because they really were just pawns. The setting for what Koheleth was writing was an ultimate unjust system for the common folk. And in these verses, Koheleth speaks about how a wise person should respond in that particular situation. Now, many of you feel in your bones that the systems in our country right now or in our day are simply geared toward oppression or suppression or some type of thing to where you say, this isn't right. And so I do think this is a really good contemporary passage. So on that next slide, we get verses 2 through 6. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and a procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Now, the reason why I say this is a really contemporary passage, no matter what side of the political spectrum that you're on, in the last 8 or 10 years, you have felt threatened, right? And you have probably said in your heart, I'm not going to follow that law. What are they going to do? And then Koheleth says things like, obey the king, right? You've taken an oath before God. And so when you think about it, what does that mean? What in the world? So if we take as Christians verse 5 to heart, that there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, it will influence how we disagree and how we go about seeing a good change if we can. So Koheleth's counsel is not to blind obedience to every act of power. In other words, if there's an administration or some law that you know is wrong, Koheleth isn't saying, suck it up, buttercup, do it because the king said so. We're Christians. We don't want to participate in evil, right? But neither is Koheleth saying that whatever happens and you think it's wrong, go straight to rebellion, right? That's not wise counsel either. Instead, Koheleth says, wise, sober conduct is to not be impulsive, do not attach yourself to evil, but instead discern what the proper time and the just way may look like. And this passage can help us think more deeply about responses to systems that are completely unjust at this time. So the next slide, I say the first thing that Koheleth says is don't confuse courage with impulsiveness, right? So in verse 3, yeah, you Kentucky people, sure you like that. In verse 3, we are cautioned not to leave the king's presence in a hurry. What this means is that we can, if we're not careful, we go straight into like protest, I'm right, you're wrong mode, right? When things feel evil. And we might not have thought everything out. We say we don't like this, therefore we're going to stop it, but we don't know the second or third order of things because we're not smart enough. We're not that wise. Therefore, Solomon says, wait, think about things before you revolt very quickly or you hurry from the king's presence. A very small example of this that I thought of works in probably your own career. I used to manage restaurants for a living, right? And this scenario played out a lot of times. I know that there has never been a line cook or a manager in restaurant history who thought they were paid what they deserved, right? And so oftentimes, maybe every other day, a restaurant worker would come up to me and say, man, y'all are taking advantage of me. I don't get paid enough to do this. This is unfair. And then they would say, they don't respect us here. I'm not doing any more work if I don't get paid more. And then they'd say, Chris, can I have a raise? And I'd say, no, you can't. And then they got this great idea. They'd be like, okay, I'll show the system. And they no call, no show. Everybody know what a no call, no show is? It means Chris gets to work a 24-hour shift. That's what that means. So what happens? Of course, I fire them, right? Then about 2 or 3 weeks later, I might see them at Walmart. And I'll say, hey, what's going on? And they'll say, I'm struggling right now. I don't have a job. I'm like, I know, I fired you. Right? And I would often think to myself, they would have this self-righteousness. Yeah, I showed you. Be like, yes, you did. I am buying food, steak, in fact, to take home and cook. What are you doing? Buying the microwave meal because that's all that they can prepare. And so I thought to myself, in a rash decision, what you think is courage was just impulsiveness. You changed nothing. I'm still getting paid. I'm still working. You're the one struggling. That's what Koheleth is trying to say, is oftentimes when we see evil, we run straight to impulsive things and we don't know the actual consequence because we're not smart enough to know. And so Koheleth says, wait, don't equate courage with impulsiveness. That's stupid. Don't do it. Now, second, in verse 5, we're warned not to confuse humility with the approval of evil. So in verses 5 and 6, it says that wisdom will lead to knowing the proper time and procedure. There will be times, next slide, there will be times in which there are things that you know are evil. But if you're not going to be impulsive, people might say, you don't care about the evil that's happening. And that's not necessarily true. It simply means that by wisdom, we know certain things that will work and certain things that will not work. The greatest modern picture of this is probably the civil rights movement. You had two competing philosophies, especially Malcolm X at the beginning of his thing, of how to control an unjust system. On the one side, such as Malcolm X's early positions, was a philosophy of retaliation and racial animus. In fact, he said, I think, 1, white people are the devil, 2, by violence shall take over, 3, we'll be the ones in charge, essentially. That didn't work out so well. People knew that was wrong. On the other side, you had someone like Martin Luther King Jr., who drew explicitly from Christian wisdom. King knew that if you fight evil with a system's own evil and hatred, the only thing you do is corrupt your own soul. So instead, he modeled, or his movement, I should say, modeled the discipline of Ecclesiastes 8. He refused to accept injustice, but he submitted himself to God's way of redemptive love, strategic patience, and knowing the proper time and procedure. One person relied on human rage, the other relied on the power of the cross, submission, and faith in God, that if we do love, peace, and justice, God will make a way. True wisdom doesn't just mean opposing evil. It means choosing God's means to overcome it. That's the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. And sadly, much of the protesting and interactions with people today reflect power and manipulation in the way we try to respond. But Christians have to remember the way of Christ is submission to God. It is the way of the cross, if you will. It's peace, love, and wisdom that must guide us. The problem is that when we pursue the Christian way of transformation and redemption, we may be accused of accepting evil. We hear the phrase, silence is violence, but that simply isn't true. But whether we we are rather choosing the way of wisdom, love, and grace. And that leads the Christian away from extremism, impulsivity, and it leads us toward knowing the proper time and procedure for addressing evil. And it's the Christian methods of addressing evil. Next slide. Don't confuse influence with control. That's a picture of a mausoleum. That's Lenin. Lenin was one of the craziest people on earth. In fact, his mother was scared to death that he would kill her because he just loved to kill people. That's how he kept in power. And nobody wanted to mess with him. But listen to verse 7 and following. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has the power over their time of death. As one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. That last verse I thought of Lenin. Anyway, even the most powerful human being who might be feared by everybody in their country cannot control their death, and they're going to end up in a box like that. And if we're fearful of this world, we might say, we'll never be able to come this. But I promise you, no matter the power, a human will die, and the system will die with it. The system may look permanent, it may look sovereign, but it's not. Every ruler, every wicked institution, every human authority is limited by God. It's limited by time and by judgment. So in light of these truths, the Christian should not be naive about evil, acting as though it doesn't exist or ignore it, but neither should we be hostile and impulsive. Instead, we Christians speak truth to power, if you will. We speak truth into situations. We do so in humility. We refuse to participate in evil. We do honor legitimate authority, but we always act with wisdom, humility, and love. And that takes us to the next verses, 10 through 13. Where Ecclesiastes says, Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. So Koheles says he sees this disturbing reality here. Wicked people may receive honor, they may live long, and may appear to prosper, and worse still, when justice is delayed, people become bold in their own sin. Ecclesiastes would say the human heart is filled with the desire to do evil, and when they have the opportunity to do it, they will. Here's a contemporary situation. If you were watching the news this week, you might have heard a clip or some story about the legal proceedings of this Luigi Mangione. I forgot how to say his name. Mangione guy. This is the guy who, in New York City, walked up to the United Healthcare executive and just shot him, right? Now that part, people are crazy and they do whatever. Who knows what happened there? When the system feels it's too oppressive or too evil, one option is to take matters into your own hands. And then there have been, in the last 8 years, crazy acts of violence and riots all over our world because people have feel that the system is against them. And Koheles points out that when this happens and there's no justice, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. But the worst part of all this is that if you look online after something happens, or if you are on Twitter, or if you have a Facebook group, or if you have friends, you'll see that people excuse craziness because of the evil systems. So because an evil system happens, it's okay for somebody to shoot somebody in cold blood. Because an evil system is happening, it's okay to bring down buildings or to set things on fire. And you think to yourself, that ain't Christian, right? Next slide would be verse 12 and 13. It says, Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better for those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen that like a shadow. Our response as Christians can never be vengeance. It is not in our vocabulary. Our weapons are not violence and vengeance. Our weapons are faith and love and humility. We do acknowledge that there are things that we do not understand. We don't know why things happen, but we do have faith that God will ultimately prevail and that justice delayed does not mean that evil is ultimately excused. Koheles makes that confession of faith. I know that it will be well with those who fear God. That is not a denial of injustice, but it is confidence that injustice will not have the final word on this earth. As people of faith, we don't have to live as though we are the arbiters and judge of all things. We can have faith that God will judge the evil in this world. What we do sometimes is to judge God's faithfulness by the short-term success of the wicked, or we can get mad at God because bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. But I promise, a delayed verdict is not abandonment. It's that God knows more than we do. It's that mystery. It's a mystery to us because of our limited understanding and our finitude. And that leads us to verses 14 through 17. There is something else meaningless that occurs on the earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too I say is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they really cannot comprehend it. So Kohelet states the problem plainly. Sometimes righteous people receive what the wicked seem to deserve, and the wicked people receive what the righteous seem to deserve. And he calls this meaningless, a vapor and injustice, and it refuses to fit neatly in our minds and hearts. And the passage doesn't give believers permission to say, I don't understand, or it gives us believers the passage. We can say, I don't understand. Wisdom is good, but wisdom cannot decode every part of God's work. Even the person who searches diligently can never fully comprehend all that God is doing under the sun or on this earth. And humility then for a Christian is absolutely vital. We don't survive this system by pretending it makes sense. We survive it by refusing to make ourselves the final interpreter of God's providence and justice. So what are some ways specifically that Christians can respond in this crazy world? First, we can learn to lament, right? We can truly say that things are wrong, and we can feel bad about it, and we can cry to the Lord and say, change this. You may or may not. We can work for justice in the places that God has placed us. We don't have to accept evil. We can work for justice. We just do it in ways that aren't evil, right? We can acknowledge what we can't explain, right? When somebody comes to you and say, how could God do this? It's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know. That stinks. And we can trust the God whose work exceeds our understanding. But let's not forget about verse 15. I read over it. Kohelet's response to this life's injustice is actually surprising. Here's what he says. We live in a world that's broken. We're not going to be able to fix it all. Sure, you can try, and you should try. But here's what I'll tell you to do. Eat, drink, and be glad in the days that God gives you. Some people might call that escapism, but it's not. Faithful gratitude in a world that we cannot control is a choice. It's a choice of faith. Joy is an act of resistance against despair. When the system says everything is broken, nothing matters, the believer can still receive food, friendship, worship, we can rest, we can laugh, and all of these things are gifts from God. We can say thank you for those things. You may not be able to fix every corrupt system this week or in your entire life, but you can refuse to surrender your soul to it. You can fear God, you can do what is right, you can love your neighbor, and you can receive food, drink, and work as God's gifts, right? Ecclesiastes may leave us longing for a king and a kingdom that is incorruptible. We want a judge whose justice is never delayed. We want wisdom that is greater than our own, and this is where Jesus enters the very system that fails people. That system of religious hypocrisy, of political manipulation, of unjust courts, or of violence. At the cross, the only truly righteous one was treated as though he were wicked. Yet God turned that greatest injustice into the means of salvation for the world. Because Christ rose, we know that evil is real, but it's not final. And suffering is terrible, but it's not meaningless. And every earthly system on this earth, every earthly system will ultimately answer to that King of Kings. This is where we're called to be the church, my friends. This place that we gather together is supposed to be an alternative to those broken systems in the world. It's supposed to be the place where people find refuge from racism or oppression or being mistreated or being hated or so on and so forth. This is the place where we hold up the mantle that says, this is what it's like to be in the kingdom of God, right? In a culture driven by manipulation and rage, the local church is an outpost of the kingdom of God. It's the place where we practice living on earth as it is in heaven. It's where we lay down the weapons of the world, surrender to Christ, we surrender to one another, and we offer a light in darkness. So you can't change the system, but you don't have to let the system change you either. The church is where we learn to live in a world of broken institutions, of delayed justice, and the powers that we cannot control. We refuse cynicism in the church because cynicism hardens the face and it hollows out our soul. We refuse to be impulsive because anger is not the same thing as wisdom. We learn to refuse complicity because fearing God means we don't contribute to the evil in this world. We cannot call evil good. We speak truth in all situations. We pursue justice. We love our neighbors with discernment and with wisdom. Here at the church, we accept that we cannot control outcomes. We cannot control governments. We cannot control institutions or even tomorrow. But we can receive this day's gifts, our meals, our friendships. We can worship, we can rest, and we can laugh, not as a denial of the things that are on this earth, but as a testimony that God's goodness has not disappeared. He has given us daily bread, and He is faithful. And as we come to our time of commitment today, it's that last part I want y'all to think about. That our church isn't a place that we gather just to fellowship, but this is a place that holds out hope to a world filled with hope and hopelessness. This is a place where you can learn to have some sense of wisdom in a world that doesn't value it. What we have to do as a church is to invite people into this alternative. Because I know my life would be terrible had I not come in contact with the church. And I know people whose life are terrible right now, and it can be strengthened through being part of the church. So what I'd love for you, I don't know why, Leslie, I don't know why you put it on there, but your bulletin cover, Jesus wants your all. I would love for you to pray about that particularly during this time as we think about our commitment. What would it really mean if you woke up and said every single thought, every single action, every single purpose belongs to God this next week? You're human. You won't be able to do it. I'm just asking you to pray about it and think what it might look like. Where are the places God would lead you? How would it radically change the education in our church or the fellowship in our church or the things we choose to do in our church? How would it change you if you gave everything to God this week? Let us stand and sing our hymn of